Karoline Leavitt had been on dozens of flights before. From campaign trails to conference panels, the airport routine had become second nature. Check-in, security, boarding. But this afternoon at Reagan National Airport felt different from the start. She arrived early, wearing a navy blue travel coat and carrying a worn leather briefcase stamped with the White House seal. Her assistant had double confirmed the ticket. Seat 3A, business class. She was heading to a leadership summit in Arizona, where she was scheduled to speak on integrity in public service. When she reached the gate, a quiet unease hung in the air. The airline agent, a young man with a stiff expression, scanned her boarding pass. Then, as if suddenly unsure, he frowned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Leavitt," he said, voice clipped. "There seems to be an issue. We're currently overbooked." Karoline blinked. "Overbooked? I reserved this seat 3 weeks ago. It's a confirmed booking." He avoided eye contact. "Yes, well, there's no room at the moment. You'll have to wait for the next flight." She glanced toward the plane through the gate window. A man in a baseball cap and sunglasses had just boarded, holding a ticket that she knew belonged to 3A. Her seat. Her name. "You just gave away my seat," Karoline said flatly. "Why?" "I don't control seating. I just follow instructions." Behind her, murmurs started to rise. Passengers recognizing her, some pulling out phones, others exchanging glances. Karoline stood tall but didn't raise her voice. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said calmly. The agent hesitated. "They're not available right now." She took a step back. Something was off. Airline errors happened, but not like this. Not with security nearby, watching too closely. Not when a full business class had just boarded, and she was the only one turned away. A flight attendant walking by gave her a sympathetic look, but didn't stop. It was as if they'd all been told not to intervene, not to explain. Just get her off the list and move on. Karoline turned to her assistant, who had been filming the exchange quietly from a bench. "Keep recording," she whispered. From the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a gray suit standing near the airline desk. He wasn't staff. He looked political. His smirk was unmistakable. "Did someone pull strings to keep me off this flight?" she murmured to herself. She didn't know it yet, but this would become more than a viral airport video. It was the beginning of a national conversation, and a revelation that would leave the country speechless. Karoline sat in the waiting area, her phone buzzing relentlessly. Within minutes, a short clip of her being denied boarding had started spreading online. Her assistant, Olivia, had uploaded it with a simple caption, "No seat for Karoline Leavitt? Watch this." She watched the video loop, her calmly questioning the agent, the awkward silence, the visible discomfort of airport staff. Already comments were pouring in. "That wasn't a mistake." "I saw her seat. They gave it away." "Political blacklist?" Karoline didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something didn't add up. She'd been flying with the same airline for years, and her position as a public figure usually meant things moved smoothly, not suspiciously. Then came the message. Her assistant's eyes widened as she turned her phone toward Karoline. An anonymous email had just come in, titled, "Watch who's booking your flights." The message contained a PDF attachment, an internal seating log marked with a red stamp reading "Manual Override." It listed her original reservation, then a second name scribbled over hers, D. Niles. No official explanation, just a swap. Karoline leaned closer. "Who's D. Niles?" "I checked," Olivia replied. "A political consultant, known for Democratic media strategy, close ties to 2 cable networks." Karoline's jaw tightened. "That's not a coincidence." She looked up. The man in the gray suit was gone, but she remembered his face. He wasn't airport staff, and he hadn't boarded the plane. She'd seen him before, in clips of Washington press events. He worked behind the scenes. "Someone didn't want me at that summit," she whispered, "and they used the airline to do it." Within hours, the media caught wind of it. Some outlets ran neutral headlines. Leavitt removed from flight amid confusion. But others were harsher. Karoline Sparks' drama at gate, subtly suggesting she had overreacted. But she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't caused a scene, and yet she had become the story. More messages began flooding in. Anonymous sources, flight crew tip-offs, even airport staff reaching out with sympathy. And then one name surfaced again and again, someone connected to both the political consultant and the airline's executive board. Karoline took a deep breath. "Okay," she said. "If they're going to make me a problem, I'll be their biggest one yet." She stood, fixed her coat, and turned to Olivia. "Book the next flight to Arizona and alert the press. I'll be speaking before the summit, just not on their stage." By the time Karoline Leavitt landed in Arizona 6 hours later, the summit was already in full swing. The ballroom of the Grand Liberty Hotel buzzed with journalists, donors, and young political hopefuls. But one seat on the stage sat noticeably empty. Front row, center, name tag still in place. Karoline Leavitt. A few organizers whispered nervously behind the scenes. They knew something wasn't right. Karoline's name was still on the schedule. No official cancellation had been announced. Some assumed she'd backed out. Others suspected something more deliberate. And then her video hit the screens. Karoline's assistant, Olivia, had uploaded a follow-up clip while they were still mid-air. Footage of the seating list with her name scratched out, the airport agent's stammering denial, and the political consultant's quiet presence at the gate. It went viral in under an hour. News outlets scrambled. Was this a clerical error or political interference? Social media turned into a storm of hashtags. Or "Let Karoline Speak," "Seat 3A Conspiracy," "Leavitt Blacklisted." As Karoline arrived at the hotel, cameras were already waiting. She didn't flinch. Wearing a crisp white blouse under a navy blazer, her cross necklace shining just beneath her collar, she walked straight into the lobby and looked directly into the nearest camera. "I didn't come here for comfort," she said firmly. "I came to speak, and it looks like someone was scared of what I might say." The reporters surged forward, questions flying from all angles. "Do you think this was intentional sabotage? Who gave the order to replace your seat? Will you still deliver your speech?" Karoline held up her phone. "Yes," she said, "but not behind a closed-door panel. If they locked me out of that stage, fine. I'll speak from the steps of this hotel, and I won't be alone." Olivia whispered to her as they walked toward the front terrace. "Fox just called. They want to stream your remarks live." Karoline nodded, her expression unwavering. "Good. Let's give them a better summit than the one they planned." Moments later, she stood on the wide stone staircase at the hotel's entrance. Dozens of guests spilled out from the conference room, curious. Others watched from their balconies above. She took the mic in her hand, lifted her eyes to the crowd, and began, "I was told there was no room. But maybe the truth is, there was no room for the truth." And with that line, silence fell. Karoline's voice carried across the marble courtyard, firm and clear. The early evening sun gleamed off the windows of the Grand Liberty Hotel as more people gathered. Attendees from inside, local press, and even hotel staff peeking out from behind planters. "They told me there was no room," Karoline repeated, her hand lightly gripping the podium Olivia had improvised using a small speaker stand. "But I've come to understand, when people try to silence you, it's not because you're wrong, it's because they're afraid you're right." Applause rippled from a small group of students gathered on the lawn. Karoline kept going, each sentence landing like a stone dropped in water, sending waves through the crowd. "I was supposed to speak about courage and leadership," she said. "But today, courage looked a lot like being told to sit down, and choosing to stand anyway." Inside the summit hall, confusion turned into quiet panic. Organizers whispered frantically as they realized that half their audience had abandoned their scheduled speaker to watch Karoline from the front steps. Someone tried to get the live stream cut, but it was too late. Fox, Newsmax, and dozens of independent journalists were already filming. Clips hit social media before the final sentence even left her lips. Then she said it. "I didn't lose my seat. I had it taken. Not because of a mistake, but because the truth makes people nervous. And I promise you this. If they think a canceled seat is enough to cancel my voice, they haven't been listening closely." That line lit up Twitter like a fuse. Within minutes, hashtags surged again, now joined by one more, #Karoline Uncancelled. In the crowd, an older woman with a worn campaign hat clutched her phone and muttered, "That girl's not just fighting for herself. She's fighting for all of us who've been told to stay quiet." Karoline stepped back from the mic, her expression calm. Olivia rushed over. "You need to see this," she whispered, holding out her phone. It was an internal message from a whistleblower inside the airline. Screenshots showing a direct order from a third-party political contact asking for her name to be removed from the flight manifest. Karoline's eyes narrowed. "So it was true," she said under her breath. She turned toward the cameras, still filming. "We have proof," she said. "And I'm not done." The crowd erupted. Somewhere inside, the original summit agenda lay forgotten, because in the real world, on the steps outside, the truth had already taken the stage. That night, Karoline sat in her hotel room, the lights dimmed except for the soft glow of her laptop. Olivia paced nearby, sorting through message after message from supporters, journalists, and, most notably, an anonymous account that had just dropped a bombshell. The whistleblower didn't just leak the email requesting Karoline's removal from the flight manifest, he included names. One of them was Logan Pierce, a known Democratic strategist and senior advisor to a media-affiliated PAC. He had contacts within the airline's corporate board and, according to the leak, had coordinated with an unnamed executive to quietly bump Karoline's seat in the interest of guest relations. But it wasn't guest relations. It was politics. "He signed it with a burner email," Olivia said, her voice tight. "But the metadata traces back to a DC network hub." Karoline leaned back, staring at the glowing screen. "So they tried to shut me out of the summit by grounding me before I could even get there." Olivia sat beside her. "What do we do with this?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "We go public. We name it." "But are you sure?" Olivia asked. "You go after him now. It becomes war." Karoline smiled faintly. "Then let it be." She pulled out her phone and opened a new post. Her fingers moved quickly, each word chosen with the precision of a scalpel. "Tonight, I received proof that my seat was removed by design, not mistake. A political operative named Logan Pierce orchestrated it to silence me. But here's the thing. I never needed a plane to fly. I only needed the truth. And I've got it." Karoline uncancelled. She hit post. Within seconds, it was shared by every conservative account in the country. Fox News broke the story live on air. Even liberal outlets like MSNBC couldn't ignore the virality. Clips of her airport confrontation and hotel step speech played on loop. And then the comments started flowing in, from other figures, politicians, even flight crew members who admitted seeing similar interference before. She'd cracked something bigger. This wasn't just a fight over a plane seat. It was about access, about silencing. And Karoline Leavitt had just made it impossible to ignore. As the hotel quieted for the night, Karoline stood by the window, looking out at the dark Arizona skyline. "They tried to clip my wings," she said softly, "but all they did was make me louder." By morning, the story had leapt beyond the bounds of political Twitter and cable news. It was everywhere. Karoline's post naming Logan Pierce had triggered a digital avalanche. Clips of her being removed from the flight were now part of think pieces, college podcasts, and reaction videos on TikTok. A trending post showed her standing on the hotel steps, cross necklace shining, voice unwavering, captioned, "She didn't wait for permission. She took the mic." Even neutral news outlets couldn't ignore it anymore. ABC's headline read, "Was Karoline Leavitt targeted?" New emails suggest political interference. Politico framed it as the seat that sparked a firestorm. At a press conference in D.C., a journalist even asked the White House press secretary if the administration condemned attempts to silence political opponents through corporate channels. The secretary deflected, but the damage was done. In Arizona, Karoline sat with Olivia and 3 independent journalists in the corner of a bustling coffee shop. The room buzzed around them, but their table held a different weight. She tapped the printout Olivia had laid down, Logan Pierce's email chain. Every line was damning. "She's too loud, not good optics for the panel. Remove her seat. Use discretion." No legal names, but enough coded language, timelines, and internal references to expose a deliberate act. "He's not stupid," Karoline said. "He wrote this like a man who's done it before." One of the journalists, a former campaign strategist turned media analyst, leaned in. "Because he has. We've tracked Pierce's influence before, media blackouts, debate blocks, but this is the first time someone stood up and made it public with proof." Karoline folded her arms. "So let's make sure it doesn't get buried." The journalist nodded. "We'll run the story. Front page." Back at the Grand Liberty Hotel, summit organizers scrambled. Their keynote speaker had been overshadowed by the very person they tried to cancel. Attendees flooded Karoline's hotel hallway, asking for a moment, a handshake, a photo. Some even left the summit early, just to hear her speak again. She didn't celebrate. She prepared. That afternoon, she held a second public event. Not on the steps, but in the park across from the hotel, where even more people could gather. Olivia had rented sound equipment and set up cameras. The Arizona sun burned high, but the crowd stood firm. Karoline stepped to the mic again, her tone quieter but more resolute. "I'm not just here because of what was done to me," she said. "I'm here because this happens to people every day. People without cameras, without titles, without teams. They get silenced in boardrooms, on campuses, in courtrooms, and it ends today, not because I say so, but because you say so." She paused. The crowd listened like it was church. "I don't want revenge. I want reform. I want every person who thought they could erase a name from a flight manifest and erase a voice from the national stage to know they've only made that voice louder." Thunderous applause rose, sincere, sustained. And somewhere in a quiet Washington office, Logan Pierce stared at his phone, watching the clip play on repeat. His fingers hovered above the screen, but there was nothing he could tweet that would undo the power of what had just happened. While the crowd in Arizona grew louder with every word Karoline spoke, a very different atmosphere settled over an upscale office suite in Washington, D.C. Inside a glass-walled boardroom, Logan Pierce stood silently as three of his senior advisors watched the video loop on a large monitor. None of them said a word. They didn't need to. Karoline's second speech had landed harder than the first. This wasn't a temporary scandal anymore. It was an unraveling. "She has every outlet eating from her hand," one of the aides muttered. "Even the moderates, even CNN covered her without a hit piece this morning." Logan sat down slowly, rubbing his temples. "We underestimated her. She wasn't supposed to fight back." "She didn't just fight back," another aide said. "She turned it into a movement." Across the country, support for Karoline surged. Even her former critics admitted she had handled the ordeal with poise and precision. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't accused without evidence. She had shown the receipts, and then let the country draw its own conclusions. It was devastatingly effective. In Arizona, Karoline met with the summit's youth delegation, students from across the nation who had watched the drama unfold from the sidelines. They surrounded her in the park after the speech, some emotional, others just angry. "They always tell us we're too young to speak," one young woman said. "But you proved we don't have to wait for permission." Karoline nodded, her eyes kind but focused. "You don't need permission to tell the truth. You only need courage. And once you do it, others will follow." That line would become another viral clip by sundown. Olivia approached, holding up her phone. "Karoline, you need to see this." She played a voicemail from an unknown number. "Miss Leavitt, this is Marcia Brenner. I'm a former Airline board member and I just saw the emails. Logan Pierce has done this before, and I have proof. Call me." Karoline's eyes sharpened. "She's legit?" Olivia nodded. "Retired last year. Clean record. Quiet, but credible." Karoline stepped aside and dialed the number. Brenner picked up on the first ring. "I've got 2 signed memos," the woman said, not wasting a second. "From last year. Same strategy, same language, same target profile, conservative women with speaking engagements." Karoline's voice lowered. "And you're willing to go on record?" "After what they just did to you?" Brenner said. "Absolutely." That night, Karoline held a closed-door strategy session with her team and the journalist who had broken the original leak. They built a timeline, verified the documents, and prepared a bombshell article for the next morning. But Karoline wanted more than a story. She wanted justice. "I'm not after his career," she said. "I'm after his blueprint. This isn't about me. It's about everyone he's silenced." She stood at the window again, the lights of Arizona flickering below. "They built an empire on quieting voices," she said. "Let's make sure they hear ours, louder than ever." By the time the sun rose over Washington, D.C., the exposé was already live. Front page of the Sentinel, one of the last remaining nonpartisan national publications, in bold letters, "Exclusive. Airline blacklists. Political pressure and the silencing of conservative voices, the Logan Pierce operation." Inside the article, signed memos, leaked emails, whistleblower statements, and 2 full interviews, one with Marcia Brenner, the retired airline board member, and another with Karoline Leavitt herself. The evidence was irrefutable. Karoline's original flight hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a long-term pattern. Multiple public figures, mostly young and outspoken conservatives, had experienced logistical complications before major events. All had links to booking agencies tied to one quiet name, Logan Pierce. But now, his name was no longer quiet. It was everywhere. Karoline woke to a phone flooded with alerts. Invitations poured in, from podcasts, television panels, student organizations, and even international media. "Karoline," Olivia said, bursting into the room, "the airline just issued an official apology, full acknowledgement. They're blaming Pierce and unauthorized coordination." Karoline scanned the statement on her screen. It was short, panicked, and vague, but they had admitted it. Later that morning, as she prepared for another speech in Phoenix, Karoline looked into the mirror. Her yellow blazer sat pressed and perfect. The silver cross around her neck gleamed. This had become something more than a defense of her own voice. It was a crusade for fairness, for every person pushed off stages, flights, or platforms simply for speaking their truth. In the front row of her speech that day sat 3 young women who had driven 5 hours just to meet her. One of them had tears in her eyes. "You proved we matter," she said softly, "even when they try to make us disappear." Karoline smiled. "They didn't silence me, they introduced me." That line again would become a headline. In D.C., Logan Pierce resigned quietly that same day. No press conference, no explanation. Just a one-line statement, effective immediately. Karoline never mentioned him by name again, because the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about what he failed to stop. That evening, Karoline stood on the rooftop of the hotel, the Arizona desert glowing amber in the distance. She turned to Olivia. "What happens now?" her assistant asked. Karoline looked out toward the horizon. "Now? We don't just speak. We build. Schools, platforms, panels, stages, no more closed doors, no more canceled voices." She took a breath and whispered what had become her new motto. "They tried to shut the door, but they left it unlocked." The next week was a whirlwind. Karoline Leavitt's name was on every screen, every panel, every podcast worth noting. But she didn't waste a second on vanity. Her focus was laser sharp. Turn the outrage into opportunity. For others. In partnership with independent journalists and transparency watchdogs, Karoline launched a digital initiative called ClearPath, a public database collecting incidents of unjust deplatforming, canceled speaking appearances, and politically motivated silencing. In its first 48 hours, over 1,000 reports poured in. Some were vague, but many were disturbingly similar to what Karoline had faced. One entry read, "Told I wasn't aligned with program messaging 2 days before I was set to speak on entrepreneurship. No replacement, no refund." Another was removed from a student panel minutes before it began. No explanation, just a whisper that I'd made someone uncomfortable. Karoline read them all. These weren't just stories, they were blueprints of silence. and she was determined to tear them apart. Meanwhile, back in D.C., a Senate subcommittee on transportation and corporate ethics launched a formal inquiry into Logan Pierce's ties to airline executives. The case escalated quickly, a subpoena was issued, depositions began, and Karoline was called to testify, not as a victim, but as a witness to a pattern. "I'm not here to settle a score," she told the panel calmly, her voice steady under oath. "I'm here to ensure no one else has to experience what I did, being erased by someone who thinks disagreement is dangerous." The testimony was broadcast live. Americans from across the political spectrum watched in silence as Karoline described not just the flight incident, but the broader culture that allowed it. "They didn't just try to keep me off a plane," she said. "They tried to keep me out of the room." The room applauded. Later that evening, Karoline returned to her hotel. Olivia met her at the door, holding her phone, glowing with another alert. "Karoline," she said, stunned. "Look at this." It was a personal tweet from Elon Musk. Karoline Leavitt stood her ground and exposed something bigger than politics. Free speech matters. Respect. Another tweet followed from Tucker Carlson. Then Ben Shapiro. Then Tulsi Gabbard. Even surprising voices from the center chimed in. And yet, Karoline's reply remained humble. "I didn't ask for a platform. I was denied one. So I built my own." That night, she went live on her own channel. No network, no producer, no script. Just a camera, a crowd, and her voice. "You may not agree with me," she said. "That's fine. That's freedom. But you will not erase me. And if they try to erase you, know this: you're not alone anymore." The comment section exploded. And somewhere in a quiet corner of America, another young woman decided to speak up. Because Karoline had made space. And once the truth has space, it spreads like wildfire. 3 weeks later, Karoline Leavitt found herself back in Washington, not for a hearing or a press conference, but for something much more symbolic. She had been invited, unanimously, by a bipartisan coalition of students to deliver the keynote address at the American Youth Leadership Forum. The same type of forum where, not long ago, her name had been quietly scrubbed from the list of speakers. This time, however, her name was printed in bold across every banner and digital display. As Karoline stepped onto the stage inside the packed convention hall, thunderous applause erupted, not just from supporters, but from those who had once remained silent. She wore a fitted dark green blazer, the same silver cross around her neck glinting beneath the lights. Her voice was calm, confident, and clear. "Not long ago," she began, "I was told there was no room for me on a plane, and then no room for me on a stage. But here's what they didn't understand." She paused. "They can take your seat, but they can never take your voice." The crowd rose to its feet. She recounted everything: the flight, the cover-up, the whistleblower, the hearing. But her speech wasn't about revenge, it was about responsibility. "Your job," she said, "is not to wait for permission. It's to speak, loudly, clearly, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient." As she spoke, the camera panned across rows of young leaders, many wearing pins, crosses, or badges once considered too political to show publicly. A quiet revolution was blooming in real time, not just of opinion, but of courage. She ended with a line that would be engraved on the forum's wall by morning. "When they say there's no room, make one. When they try to silence you, speak louder. Because freedom doesn't belong to the few. It belongs to all who dare to use it." Afterward, she stepped backstage, where Olivia waited with a quiet smile and a tap on her phone. "Karoline," she said, "you need to see this." The video of Karoline's speech had already reached 10 million views within 2 hours. Hashtags like uncancelled, Karoline speaks, and freedom has a voice trended across the globe. Even news anchors who once dismissed her were forced to acknowledge something had changed. Not just for Karoline, but for the entire conversation. Outside the venue, someone had placed a single airplane boarding pass on the steps. It was mock-printed with Karoline's name on it, and the word "cancelled" crossed out in red. Underneath, it read, They tried to take her seat. She took the whole room instead. Karoline picked it up, folded it gently, and smiled. Because the truth couldn't be grounded. Not anymore. In a world where silence is often enforced, Karoline Leavitt proved that one voice, steady, unshaken, and unwilling to back down, can change everything. They tried to deny her a seat, but she stood taller than ever. They tried to shut a door, and she opened one for thousands. From a canceled flight to a national reckoning, Karoline's story reminds us that the fight for truth often begins in the smallest moments of injustice. This wasn't just about politics, it was about freedom, about the right to speak, to be heard, and to stand firm in the face of pressure. And maybe most of all, it was about courage. Because when the system says, "There's no room for you," the brave make space anyway. Thanks for watching. And remember, when they try to silence one voice, it's up to all of us to make sure the echo is even louder.